Cold, another big bad of the elemental types. Cold damage is pretty self-explanatory, like most damages here. Freezing, shivering, water, cold, things like that, whether it be the icy touch of death or an icicle explosion. Spells that deal cold damage can range quite a bit, but at least they keep, within their relative flavor, like same with fire and so on. Spells that deal cold damage include Armor of Agathis, Cone of Cold, Fire Shield, ironically, because it has a cold option, Freezing Fear, Frost Fingers, Frostbite, Hunger of Hadar, Ice Knife, Ice Storm, Wall of Ice, Investiture of Ice, Ray of Frost, Snowball Storm, Spirit Shroud is called one of the options, Storm of Vengeance, and then elemental spells like Prismatic Spray and Chaos Bolt have cold as a damage type option. Like most of the elemental spells, most of the cold spells are evocation or conjuration, summoning icicles or hurling cold energy at the opponent. Many oozes are immune or resistant to cold damage, such as the Black Pudding, Grey Ooze, and a few others, if I recall correctly. Though, funnily enough, one ooze, this thing checker, is actually vulnerable to cold. It's interesting because, like, acid makes sense for the oozes to be, like, resistant to. But I think almost vulnerability to cold is more fitting of oozes because, like, their forms can't shift as much. But I mean, if you want to make your ooze or change things, it's always an option because I think vulnerability should be intuitive. Again, while with fire, some ice creatures are vulnerable to it. On the flip side, some fire creatures are vulnerable to cold. No surprise there. Fire snakes, salamanders, and magnum memphits are just a few examples of this. But again, vulnerabilities are still few and far between. Creatures from the ocean, like sea furies and hags, are resistant to cold, as well as creatures who are actually in the cold, like yetis are, of course, immune to cold. And creatures who are resistant or immune to the other elemental types. And also, many fiends are resistant to cold. Maybe because of that kind of extreme hotness kind of makes them adds resistance on both sides. And fiends are also, they're immune to a lot of the elemental types in general. So just keep that in mind. Also, a lot of undead, of course, especially like the drowned undead creatures, anything related to the sea. And those also deal cold damage, of course, and then cold creatures like yetis, of course, deal cold damage, so be prepared for that. Cold elementals are also white and silver dragons are, of course, immune to cold and dish out those cold breath weapons. Many abilities that affect elemental damage, of course, affect cold-related things, like we have Elemental Adept, Elemental Spell for the one of the meta-medic options from Tasha's Cauldron to Everything, Draconic Sorcerer, etc. Surprisingly, cold-related class abilities are kind of not hugely common. We have the Frost Room from the Rune Knight, some of the 4-element monk abilities, Fathomless Warlock, but not much. And honestly, I don't really know why there isn't a Frost-themed subclass. We're getting, like, everything else. I mean, I guess kind of, like, you have the sea, so tend to kind of fall flat in that regard, but, cold messes with the body's balance, inflicting hypothermia and shivering, even sometimes, causing the body to go into shock from this extreme imbalance. Often it can be coupled with shattering or piercing or bludgeoning, like Ice Knife or Ice Storm, where something is actually frozen. There's an impact there, and then the cold of that thing affects you as well. A little extra touch, like a lot of poison stuff, where you stab it and then the poison gets to them. Then extreme cold can blacken and frostbite the body, or even like freeze parts of you and like cause you to be brittle, or your enemies to be, which is always fun to flavor. Terrifying, but fun to flavor. Then, there's also extreme cold. Extreme cold, if you don't have heavy clothing suited for the cold, or There's other ways introduced in Icewind Dale, like different blessings and ways to resist the cold. But if you don't have any of that, or certain race abilities like the Goliath, which don't have to worry about very cold temperature, at the end of each hour in that extreme cold, you have to make a Constitution save with a DC of 10. On a failure, you take 1 level of exhaustion. Creatures with resistance or immunity cold damage automatically cede as they're used to the climate and to such conditions. Frigid water is similar, except it's every minute you spend rather than every hour. And cold clothes and resistance can't save you. I like the flavor of a cold spell. I like thinking of liquid nitrogen in particular. If you've ever seen it, the way it kind of freezes and mists around is always really fun. So overall, that pretty much covers all the bases for cold damage. Again, I would say the most interesting thing about cold damage is probably that it's coupled with more physical damage types. Because as itself, it can be a bit hard to flavor rather than just a ball of bluish white energy. Regardless, this is Sean from Dodeca Dungeon. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.